Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the East Riding of Yorkshire series. Together with the unparished city of Hull, it forms the county of the same name. There's 172 parishes here. Which one are we in today? Welcome back to the East Riding of Yorkshire once again, people, and I promise you in this episode we are going to see a lot more than we did last time out. We were in Cottam last time and this is the next village over from Cottam and it's much bigger. So without further ado, let's walk around it and see what it's got. Its name is Langtoft. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Langtoft, Longhouse. Next up in the East Riding we have Langtoft, or if you prefer longer names, Langtoft on the High Wolds. Sharing the same etymology with Langtoft in Lincolnshire and the French village of Lanquetot in Normandy, the place name literally means long house. Toft, after all, is an old Norse term meaning the site of a house. In this one we'll be exploring what is quite a hilly village. Beginning at the southernmost tip, you don't realise how much of a hill this one stands upon until you reach the church, which occupies the most elevated ground. At one point in this walk, I even had to crawl on my hands and knees because the ground was so steep, and I'm not even joking. So what does Langtoft have then? Well, aside from the church, there's 2 crosses, a pub, a former school, a play area, a bowls club, and an old pond which has now been filled in. None of those things, though, are what it's mostly known for. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to mention the dreaded F word in this episode, flooding. Langtoft has flooded on several occasions, and it still does in heavy rainfall. Thankfully though, these days it's generally confined to one area and it's nowhere near as severe as it used to be. There are at least 2 flood markers here which show how high the water used to get. So let's go and find them and see exactly what Langtoft is like. We begin our walk at the south of the village on the road to Kilham, a place which was considered to be the capital of the Wolds at one time. Langtoft is laid out primarily along Front Street. This is the main road to Scarborough and it slices its way across these gorgeous hills in a north to south fashion. Landmarks are few in Langtoft, but there are a couple. Here's the Bowls Club to start us off. This is considered to be one of the finest in the county, despite how this rain makes it look. The club should not be confused with the one at Langtoft in Lincolnshire, who also have an excellent green themselves. Let's get this job out of the way next. Here's the parish notice board and that's Langtoft off the list. We have 19 to go. With some pretty looking trees overlooking the Bowls Club and the notice board, we're now approaching one of the greens dotted around the village. Arguably, this first one is the most interesting. It features a cross which memorialises an English poet. Named Peter de Langtoft, he was born in the village in the 13th century. An Augustinian canon at Bridlington Priory, he wrote an entire history of England in Anglo-Norman verse. It became known as Langtoft's Chronicle. After walking up the road for a short way, we find a second green. This one's got another cross, this time a war memorial. 17 Langtoftians were lost in conflict, 13 in World War I and 4 in World War II. This green used to be something else many moons ago. In true East Yorkshire fashion, it was a mere, but as you can see it's now been filled in. Even though it's no longer a pond, it still to this day is referred to as such by some residents. This brings us to Langtoft's history of flooding. Although it's not as bad now as it has been in the past, the former pond remains the most likely area to flood after heavy rainfall. Well, it might not be a pond anymore, but if this rain keeps up, you never know. There might be a new pond there eventually. It just feels like it hasn't stopped raining at all today. Okay, so now we've come past that. We are taking a left turn along this road here. We're heading for a sports field, and I believe there's a path that connects that sports field to the churchyard. If there is, there'll be a handy little link, because it means I won't have to turn back on myself at any point. So yeah, let's see if there is indeed a path up there. Sledmere Road runs uphill into the Wolds. From this point onwards, the hills definitely do come into play. In 1888, a huge wave of water rushed down these declivities with terrific force thanks to a burst waterspout. A little later in the church, I came across a display that mentioned it, even though at the time I knew nothing about it. So here's the playing field, and note its gates. They were designed by the pupils of the now closed Langtoft Primary School and were mounted at the entrance a few years ago. The parish council have maintained this field since 2015 and have some plans to further expand it. From the field I noticed a building on the road which initially I thought may have been a village hall, so I ambled across to it to have a look. It turns out it's not a village hall, rather it's a business called H&B Pressings, and they're precision engineers. Turning around at this point, the question still remained, are you able to access the churchyard from here? Well, there was only one way to find out, and that was to climb this very steep hill into the trees. A few moments later, I had my answer. Here's the churchyard at St Peter's, so I'd call that a successful mission. But it wasn't easy. Well, I answered the question at least. You can get into the churchyard from the little playing field there, but that is a very steep hill. I had to crawl up the hill because it's really, really slippery at the moment, because of course we've just had a lot of rainfall. Anyway, here we are then, walking into the church through these trees, and the church should appear on the left any second now, and it does. Right, this is next. St Peter's Church stands on the highest ground in the village. It was given a Grade 1 listing in 1968. The oldest parts are its 13th century tower, south aisle and nave. The chancel is early 14th century, but it has a slightly more recent chancel arch. The whole building was restored between 1900 and 1903 for Sir Tatton Sykes. Unusually, that work was carried out by Hodgson Fowler and not John Loughborough Pearson, as we've come to expect at others on the Sykes Churches trail. Incidentally, St Peter's was the last of the Sykes churches. It was open too, so let's have a look inside. The first thing I found in here was a display all about Holy Trinity Chapel at Cottam. Now, as we saw last week, that building is quite dilapidated and badly in need of some TLC. According to this display though, here in Langtoft, funds are being raised for its upkeep, which may explain the railings we saw around it in that episode. St Peter's also has several other displays about the village, its history of flooding and the church itself. You can get lost in these. St Peter's is a lovely church all in all, with some great examples of intricate woodwork. Its tower contains, by the way, 2 bells dating from 1620 and 1953. Well, let me tell you people, it's well worth coming into this church because there's all sorts of things here on display, lots of historical information. Someone's gone to a lot of trouble to make all these displays. There's quite a few of them. I can see at least 5, if not 6, just from where I'm standing. They're brilliant. There's a map here of Langtoft. Probably can't see it very well because there's not much light in this part of the church. There's another one here which is a little bit larger. But there's loads of information. I mean, it would take me forever to read all this, to be honest. There's lots of newspaper cuttings as well on these displays, and old pictures, times gone by in this village. Well worth coming in to have a look at all of this. This headline here caught my eye. This one's on about when a water sport roared through Langtoft. Now I can't really read this because A, it's dark, and also it's a bit blurry, that image. I wonder what that's all about. A water sport. Water spout. I'm sorry, water spout. Water spout, not water sport. That proves how dark it is in here. But yeah, if you've got the time, certainly bring yourself in here and have a look at all these displays. They're brilliant. And the church is fabulous too as well. It's always worth coming to see the church. And it's great that Holy Trinity Chapel in Cottam is also being maintained, isn't it? When we saw that last week, I genuinely thought it was derelict and it was just standing there doing nothing. But obviously it's still kept in a decent state of repair. So yeah, hats off to the people of Langtoft for that. And for everybody who keeps it up, I suppose. But yeah, that's St. Peter's Church here in Langtoft. Time to go back out of the door and see what else we can find. Actually, just before we do, I noticed this on the way out, so I'm going to include it as well. Literally, just as you walk in the door here, you'll see this stone. And this has got a plaque underneath it. And I can't read this because obviously it's light in this part of the church. This is the left half of the main doorway lintel to the ancient chapel from Cottam. The inscribed Angus die ends through the shoulder of the lambs with the head and front leg on the right-hand stone, which no longer exists. The style of carving is similar to the 1120 font, perhaps from the same stonemason studio. The rebate for the door is evident and the overall condition is good. I concur. On Church Lane is the former Langtoft Primary School, which closed in 2013. Now, with no school, Langtoft's children have to travel elsewhere, but there is a school bus service provided. Langtoft Primary originated as a national school and it was erected in 1846. It was considered a good building, and when full it could accommodate 150 children. In the 1800s, the average attendance was around 110. There was also an institute and a library in Langtoft in those days too. Now, along with several other former facilities like a shop, they've all gone, leaving the village mostly residential. Now we're beginning to work our way back downhill again via Ratton Row and Scarborough Road. Langtoft has a residency of just under 400, and although most of the village's amenities have long since closed, the community remains vibrant. One thing Langtoft lacks though is a community centre, and that brings us to the village pub, which we'll find in a moment. In 2019, a village group by the name of Langtoft Community Hub attempted to raise funds to buy the property and run it as a community venue with other services like a shop and a book exchange. It seemingly though fell through. This is the pub in question. Langtoft's pub history can be traced back to 1729. By 1823 there were two pubs in the village. The Ship was originally known as the Nelson. The other one was called the George and Dragon. That however closed in 1960, leaving the Ship as the sole pub in Langtoft. Let's briefly touch on the other businesses in the village as we arrive back on Sledmere Road in a small square. The village has no shop these days. It closed in 2007. The post office also did so 3 years earlier in 2004, and it was located within the building you can see here. It's now a house. It seems there was a community shop at the Ship at some point thereafter. Around the back I found a sign pointing you towards one, but it's apparently closed now. This is Back Street, by the way, which runs parallel to Front Street. On a third, small green, is a bus stop, but it's not in use. It's at this point we can learn a bit more about Langtoft's flooding history. This house nearby has a stone marker which records the level reached by floodwaters on July the 3rd, 1892. The most severe ever recorded here, it was known as the Great Flood of Langtoft. That marker is 7.5 feet off the ground. Despite the flooding issues, Langtoft has grown a little bit in recent years. Here's Cobble Field, which is a good example of the newer developments. Generally speaking though, brand new housing has come in fits and starts due to a lack of funds from housing developers. I know it's only my personal opinion, but I don't think Langtoft would benefit from growing any larger than it currently is. This final section saw me weave my way around Green Lane and Chapel Lane. Now the sun was starting to come out and the village started to look somehow different, more desirable maybe. Lastly, we have another local business. Cambrai makes specialist aircraft coverings for increasingly rare and fragile aeroplanes, hence the one at the rear of this old chapel. They also have bases at Leeds East Airport and at Audley End. The chapel was dedicated to St Mary and it was Wesleyan. It was built in 1874. Next door is an old Sunday school, a separate building that's now a house. Langtoft also had a primitive Methodist chapel on the Cotton Road, which was built in 1839. Finishing this walk-off is an old phone box, literally just an empty shell with no windows. And there we are, back at the cross, which is, pretty much the end of the route, I suppose, because from this point, we just have to follow the road back down to the beginning near the Bowls Club, and that's it. That's Langtoft. What a beautiful place. You know what, it was better when the rain had stopped. So first 20 minutes was quite difficult because it was still coming down quite heavy and it was cold and it was wet and it was horrible. But as soon as the sun started to come out between those clouds, Langtoft changed. The character of the village changed, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this one. I really have. I think this is probably going to go somewhere in my top 5 best villages so far here in the East Riding of Yorkshire, and that is quite an accolade, let me tell you. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.